welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb, and I'm joined by Drs. Rod Rosenblatt, Scott Keith, and Adam Francisco. Today we are continuing down our topics of the Reformation series, and so what we're going to do today is an episode on faith and reason, and I really want to do this episode because I'm starting my MA courses this week as of recording, actually, and I'm entering a course on faith and reason that I'll be doing over the next year, and I thought, well, why don't I try to kick off this course with just like a big crash course of the Thinking Fellows, and then we can share that with the rest of the listeners out there who would like to listen to this topic as well. But before we get into that, I'd just like to remind everybody, if you are enjoying the show, if you've been listening to the show for a while but still haven't subscribed to the show, now is a good time to do it. Subscribes help you make sure that you never miss an episode. It automatically downloads the episode into whatever app you choose, whether that be the Apple podcasting app, Google Play Store, Overcast, Stitcher, and the like. So if you subscribe to those, you get the show every week, and then it helps us keep track of downloads better. It helps me get a better number of how many people are actually listening to the show. So if you go ahead and do that, that would be awesome. Also, if you can give us a review on whatever podcasting service you use, whether that be iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher. Most of those platforms have their own set of reviews. So if you go ahead and do that, that helps us a lot. It bumps us up in the listing. That way, when people start typing thinking, it pops up to the list before they even get to fellows and things like that. Helps discovery of the show to new audiences. So thank you for your support there. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I update the page every week with the new episode. So if you're somebody who is busy at work behind your computer at Facebook, like a lot of us are nowadays, you can be reminded that you have a show that you can listen to while you type away at your computer. All right. I think we're ready to get into this week's episode.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you put this on the docket to talk about, and I just now found out that it's because you're signed up for a class on faith and reason, because I've been this semester at the university helping some master's students walk through a class on Luther's early use of reason and how that sort of made its way into his early theology. And it's been great. There's not very many students in the class, but we end up doing it. I think in America you'd call it, I don't know, the style where the readings, sort of like a reading
tutorial.
Course. Yeah, style. Tutorial style. And they have a lot of great questions, and so I've got some notes today, so that's good. But, I mean, I think classically what goes on here, especially within Lutheranism, is that everyone is sort of aware of Luther's...
Well, you got the two major quotes, right? You got the, philosophy is the devil's whore, and then reason is the handmaiden of faith or something like that, right?
Of theology.
Of theology, yeah. I mean, and there's more than two, really. The more you get into Luther's writings, he'll say things like reason is the devil's bride and other quotes like that. And I think sometimes it's very easy to believe that the Lutheran / Protestant doctrine of sola scriptura means that we believe somehow that we're able to access what God has to say in the scriptures without using our reason, or by setting it aside. And you'll sometimes get this in fundamentalists and even evangelical circles where we don't have a theology, we just teach the Bible type stuff.
Yes.
And that's a mischaracterization of, I think, both Luther's concerns and sola scriptura. And so I thought it'd be helpful today to just maybe run down. So what did Luther mean, maybe when he said reason is the devil's whore, or reason is the devil's bride? What do we mean when we say reason is the handmaiden of theology? What role does reason play in the life of the Christian as they're trying to access the truth of God by means of his holy word? Is there a difference between categories of faith and categories of epistemology when we look into this? We, of course, everybody sitting at this table has a vested interest in evidential apologetics as a means of defending the Christian faith. How does a particular view of reason influence what we do in evidential apologetics? So maybe let's just start at the top there. What did Luther mean when he said reason is the devil's whore?
he was reacting to what was going on almost universally in his day, where by the work of St. Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle had become substantive as to the content of real theology, and Luther would have none of it. He was trying to force things to Bible text.
Right. Adam, I'm sure you ran across this many times in your research when you're looking at Luther's response to Islam and whatnot. Where do you think he was going with that specifically?
Well, if you read Thomas or the other scholastics of the High Middle Ages, they will refer to Aristotle as the philosopher.
Absolutely, with a capital T and the.
Yeah, and
He's been canonized.
yeah, and I mean it's not. It is a bit hyperbole, but it's not too far from the truth to say that Thomas and others baptized Aristotle.
Yeah,
they kind of
that's right.
made him.
Sure.
There's sort of two things going on. You have Aristotle being made to speak Christian, and then Christian theology being imposed on Aristotle in the Middle Ages, depending on what figure you're looking at. But this was a real big issue in the 13th century when you have Aristotle reintroduced into the Western universities, Paris in particular, and you've got one group arguing that not only just the method of Aristotle, his approach to knowledge, but the actual substance, the actual content, because he was the clearest thinking pagan, he's somebody that we must...
And the artwork reflected it. In many cases, Christian art had such characters in heaven.
Yeah, yeah. Or Raphael's School of Athens, a bit of a different thing. You got Aristotle and Plato in the middle, and all these great, many of them Christian, not all, thinkers listening in on their conversation. Aristotle pointing down, Plato pointing up. I mean, they played a huge role, not just in method, but in content, such that you even find some Christian theologians saying, well, if Aristotle believes the universe is eternal, it must be eternal.
That's right. Yep.
So
Now, how do we get the scriptures to say that?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Oh, God.
And the same thing happens even before it happens in Christian Europe in the Muslim world, where Aristotle sets the method and the content, and everything else is forced into it. So Luther comes around, and this is Luther can, in my stuff with Luther on Islam, he can use Aristotle.
Yep.
But he's very quick to insist that Aristotle cannot inform theology.
Yep.
So he doesn't reject Aristotle, logic, reason, wholesale. He just makes distinctions. He's very careful on what his authority or his sources are going to be.
Sure.
And when it comes to the content, So
Yeah.
a lot of people talk about Luther, of course, can critique Aristotle up and down and sideways, but it's actually more of a critique of the misuse of Aristotle by these scholastic theologians.
Or the adaptation of Aristotle, so in the class I'm teaching, we're using as the primary textbook David Anderson's Martin Luther, The Problem of Faith and Reason, which we should stick in the show notes.
Yes.
Great book. David Anderson is known well to the back deck. He's a former student of Rod's, went on to Oxford, studied under Alistair McGrath, I believe.
First reader was Alistair, second was Dr. Montgomery.
Okay, yeah, and the book is, forward is by Dr. Montgomery. But it's interesting, when in going through that with the students, you really get the sense that for Luther, that we take the word reason and we go one direction with it. In other words, just the God-given ability of your mind to figure stuff out. And that Luther is not just talking about that. He's not just talking about whether or not you have, even in your fallen state, the ability to figure some stuff out, even civilly. What he's reacting against in a lot of ways when he says, reason is devil's bride or something like that, he's reacting to, and the later it gets, the conversation becomes different, right? Early on, it's certainly only a reaction to scholastic theologians, but later on, it can be a reaction against the enthusiasts too. Those people that are, in an interesting way, part of the Reformation, but that are setting the scriptures aside in favor of personal revelations that come to them directly.
Yeah, we would say the closest word I think we've got in English is Pentecostal,
Yeah. And then even
not Baptist.
Not Baptist. And then even to some other of the other reformers who, when they're dealing with issues like on the Lord's Supper and Christology, want to, in a sort of deductive fashion, apply axioms to the text of Scripture, things
Yep.
that they believe that they know are true from quote-unquote reason.
Like the finite cannot contain the
Right,
infinite, those
that's
sorts
right.
of things.
Yep, and apply them to Scripture. And I think one of the best parts of Anderson's book is that he really draws the reader to the pointy end of the stick, that what's going on here is that there's a reaction against applying, I want to say to some extent formal logic, or at least their knowledge or understanding of it at that point, or axiomatic statements to scriptures, and certainly not imposing particular, not philosophy or reason, but philosophies or systems of philosophy, and making the scriptures sort of be pressed through that wire mesh. And it's an interesting distinction, and I think it's one that we don't hear when we hear reason is the devil's bride or reason is the devil's whore. We hear just using your brain.
Yes.
Yeah, cognitive ability or something like
And
that.
that's not at all what Luther is saying here. I mean, because obviously to even make a statement like that is to use one's reason. You're
And-
figuring out that reason is something.
When he counsels lay Christians who are talking to Islamic representatives, his counsel is use every bit of wits God has given you. Mm-hmm. Talk about a positive.
Yeah.
Right.
In the great Galatians commentary, so that's mid-1530s, I believe, where he, in the first volume, in the American edition, he says, when you have to speak to the Turks, the Jews, other sectarians, they don't care about the history of the church, the liturgy, the Bible, and so on. You got to use every bit of reason that God has given you and be as subtle and witty as a controversialist as possible. So, in the large catechism, or the small catechism, the explanation of the first article of the creed, he says, what does this mean? God has given us, or me, my reason and my sense experience, and still preserves them, even after the fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you do have sort of, and I think we should get into this eventually, you do have it's a classic Lutheran tension, the juxtaposition is explanation of the third article. I
Yes.
cannot by my own reason or strength.
Believe in Christ.
Yeah, believe in my Lord Jesus Christ or come to him.
So here he is in 1536 in a disputation concerning man on anthropology. He says, it is certainly true that reason is the most important and the highest in rank among all things, and in comparison with other things of this life, the best in something divine. It is the inventor and mentor of all the arts, medicines, laws, and of whatever wisdom, power, virtue, and glory men possess in this life. Nor did God, after the fall of Adam, take away this majesty of reason, but rather confirmed it. So,
Right.
in the, if you will, the left-hand kingdom, when we're figuring out
Civil affairs.
horizontal life,
Yeah.
reason reigns supreme.
Absolutely. To this, and that cannot be denied, right? Just look at the way that you function in this world. You don't function in this world by asking God to give you a direct revelation of, how a building should be built or whatever. I mean, beyond the time of Noah and the building of the ark, we've gone from that to using reason and mathematics and engineering principles and, examining what's worked and what's not worked from a very evidential perspective and empirical perspective. We do that. But I do think, and Anderson points this out, that Luther is always careful to point out, even when pointing out both the glories and the downfalls of reason, that one of the issues that we need to be aware of when we're doing theology is that reason is always prone to idolatry. Mm-hmm. I mean, when it comes to right-hand matters concerning the gospel, matters concerning our salvation, that our reason will always lead us more towards the law and towards building ourselves up in the law. Than towards reliance on Christ, who is a stumbling block to our scandal to our reason. And in that sense, that when we're thinking theologically, or you can maybe even see it this way, when we're thinking soteriologically about how we're saved, reason will always be prone to lead us into idolatry. Yeah. I thought there's another interesting thing that you said, Adam, that I've struggled with in studying Melanchthon, is that And when it comes to Aristotle and relying on Aristotle, the scholastics didn't always make a distinction between the substance of Aristotle's teaching and the utilization of his method. I've found that struggle in Melanchthon. Melanchthon is heavily influenced by Aristotle and the rest of the classical authors.
And the whole Western world.
Right, in the whole Western world. But and even when it comes to theology with Melanchthon, you can see that there's a tension that he sometimes doesn't maintain between saying, okay, there's a methodology that we have here that's helpful and that's effective, but that it can bleed over, the substance of what is being said there can bleed over into the theology. And honestly, following Luther's warning or making it true into a certain amount of idolatry that goes along with their building up our own merit, our own abilities, more so than the scriptures would say.
I would say even not just in theology, but in horizontal life, if reason you can build up all sorts of intellectual idols,
Absolutely,
philosophy,
yeah.
political philosophies, all these other things that are, if all of a sudden it's no longer about just getting by and making sense of things here, there, and everywhere, but all of a sudden it becomes kind of dogmatic, a philosophy that becomes dogmatic, that in a way is an idol of a sort. Because, dogma is something fixed, eternal, and so on and so forth. And who is man to think that he can figure out things horizontally, politically, secularly?
At least to that level of certainty.
Yeah. Now, certainly human beings have this great capacity to understand things.
And to figure stuff out.
Yeah, but they've always got to be, Dr. Rosenblatt always taught us this, be open to being proven wrong, to falsification. You might be wrong on certain things. Be a little humble epistemically. But once your philosophy says, this is it, I've arrived, that's terribly naive. And I would argue, again, idolatrous.
Well,
You've
that's
set
sort
up
of
a new idol or
the
a god.
downfall of the age of reason, right? Or the Enlightenment era is that we've made it. We've reached the pinnacle. We've figured all this stuff out. And now all that's left is to work out the details.
Yeah, what Lewis called chronological snobbery.
Right. Yeah.
The latest is the best.
Yeah. I was appalled, though, I have to say, a couple years ago when I was in an airport and I picked up a book called 100 Ideas That Must Die or That Must Go Away. And the idea of the necessity of, if a proposition is true, you must be able to set out the ways in which it can be shown to be untrue. In other words, the principle of falsification was one of the ideas that they said had to die.
Yeah.
Oh my
Really?
God.
That book's
Oh, good
scary
grief.
for more than that reason. Yeah,
That's worse than Quine. Well, never mind.
Anyway, you brought it up.
Well,
It just,
that chronological snobbery is, I think, a particular threat, even probably more so now than in Lewis's time with all our technology. We are really apt to think that we've reasoned ourselves, or we've progressed our science, and now we replace the word reason with science. Often they become kind of, even though it's not always proper science, it's not actually proper empiricism where we get some of these ideas.
Right.
But we think we've come so far that any change or looking back is actually reversion into some sort of
Superstition.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading some of the latest stuff on AI, and what you're describing is on every page.
Yeah.
A kind of the naivete that preceded both world wars.
we're there.
We're there.
Yeah. That was evident when I participated in the Crosswise Institute with Concordia this past summer, and they brought in the help me.
Voltan?
Zoltan, and he's a what? He's a transhumanist.
Yeah, he's a transhumanist.
And there's an arrogance that comes, and you can see this, right? So this is a great lead-in to our break, possibly, but in the case of Zoltan, reason has certainly become his idolatry. The fact that we have the ability with our technology and the things that we've already figured out and deduced and to one day extend our life and to the point where the only time your life will end is when you want it to end.
Yep.
That has certainly, so even he's finding his salvation, in other words, his perpetual life, in what he thinks we collectively can figure out via the use of our reason. And it certainly does, even as Adam said, in left-hand matters, in that case, become an idolatry. And that,
And it never works in radical
well,
evil.
that's the thing.
Never.
If you just look at it, and I actually asked him this question when he was here, I said, if you just look at this empirically, this has never worked out. Like, if you just look at this from the perspective of history, what you're saying has been believed before, and it has always led to mass destruction and death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's never worked out.
Well, and that's what's weird about today is, technological advancements are, if our way of living has improved or our comfort level has improved, that means our code of ethics must also be better than in the past too, and our religious beliefs and being free of them must be better
Or
than in the
lack
past too.
thereof, yeah.
And so you get things where, like, maybe, having computer technology is an objective improvement in some way, but that doesn't mean everything in our society is also an improvement or
The marriage
even-
issues.
Even Paul Tillich.
Perfect, yeah.
yeah.
Even Paul Tillich. I won't say anything more about him, but
He's dead.
he
It's okay.
he said, "There is no way I can get across to you what it was like to live in Europe before World War I began."
Right, and if you read any of the accounts of that, it's like living now, right? Where the general consent, well, not really now. There's a lot of turmoil now that I think wasn't the case, and we have the historian here. But all my readings of accounts prior to World War I is there's a big surprise that a war was going on all of a sudden.
Yeah,
That-
it
it's
was
like,
what couldn't happen.
what's going on? I mean, everything was going great. We're reaching
Optimist.
Yeah.
To the
we're
extreme.
reaching the
Yeah.
top of our capabilities as human beings,
Right.
and we have all this new technology, and our quality of life is so good, and all of a sudden, millions of people are dying. Whereas towards the end of the war, their reliance on their reason couldn't even help them figure out, for the most part, why they were still fighting.
Yeah. And by the end of World War II, the pendulum swung from that kind of arrogant optimism to total pessimism.
Yeah.
You can't know anything. Existentialism.
Yep.
Yeah.
The pendulum went kabang to the
Yeah.
other side.
Yeah. Well, you have the culmination of, maybe you could say 1914 to 1935, kind of collapse them as one time period in a little bit, and say the culmination of this is nuclear. We're bombing people with nuclear weapons, and we had the ability via our reason to kill so many people over the course of years. Now we have the ability to do it over the course of minutes.
Yeah.
I always get a kick out of my students when I teach medieval history. I always ask them about their assumptions about the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and wars, killing all the time. And I said, what if I told you that in one war in the modern age, fought between very rational people, killed more in just about a year than all the wars of the past?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, so you get these people in the early 20th century who think that they're on the cutting edge of something huge.
Because of their reason.
Because of their reason, and they think they've figured things out in an abstract realm, and they're certain, it's dogmatic, and then they use their reason to kill each other very efficiently. Machine guns, gas, artillery, you name it.
Yep. Did that register with your students?
No.
Yeah.
Well, yes, of course, in case they're listening, but no.
Okay.
For 2 minutes.
Well, that's the
one of
thing. We live, especially for that. It's an interesting conundrum here where we are now with this, because I think that it's not so much optimism as indifference that the students face now. I don't think they're eternally optimistic. They're not. In fact, there's been some articles that have come out over the last couple of months that have alluded to the fact that the last financial crash, because in this generation their prosperity, which was unknown in human history, was all built on debt. When the last crash happened, many of them who lived through it and remember it even from their childhood, and the havoc it wreaked on their families, are essentially very pessimistic. They're not super optimistic, but they're indifferent. They just don't care.
Yeah.
And that's a totally another subject. But I think that in a lot of ways we are on that same place with what we think about reason, what we think it can figure out and whatnot. But I don't think it's led to an eternal optimism. It's sort of led to a bit of indifference.
Or a presentism.
Well, and the suicide is, to many of them, a very real option daily.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about faith and reason as we do it in evidential apologetics?
Yeah, let's take it. It's time for a break,
Right.
and we'll jump right into that because I want to talk too about the effects of sin on our reason.
Yeah.
And because I know within the field of apologetics, especially with those who practice presuppositionalism, that that's
Yeah,
a
the noetic effects
that's a
of sin.
very real thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
How does sin affect what we can and can't know?
Yep.
Yep. All right, take a break.
Welcome to our break. Today we're going to talk about The Resurrection Fact. This is a book that we sell in the 1517 Legacy shop and on Amazon.com. You can find it at shop.1517legacy.com. That website has been newly remodeled just like a month ago, and it's a fantastic shopping experience now compared to what it was. It's very seamless. We also now offer free shipping on orders of $20 or more. So what that means in our shop is if you buy 2 books, you'll get free shipping. So you can stop by there. We price all of our books on our shop at or below the same price they are on Amazon. So it's pretty rare for a retailer to, on their shop, sell things for lower than what Amazon has them at. And we try to do that. We try to make it so that we sell books on Amazon and people can get free shipping and it's accessible there. But if you come to us directly, you'll get a little bit of a break on those books, which is really cool. And again, if you pick up 2, you'll get free shipping anyways. So you can pick up 2 books a little cheaper and get them straight to your house at a reasonable time. We're talking about faith and reason on this episode, and The Resurrection Fact is an apologetic work that's edited by Dr. Francisco and by Pastor Bombaro in San Diego. And
Pastor Dr. Bombaro.
Oh, Pastor Doctor. You know, we just talked about this like 2 episodes ago. It's really difficult. Can't keep track of it all.
Doctor.
But you have I think it's actually your chapter in there that deals
Sola
with
Scriptura.
faith and reason.
Best little piece on Sola Scriptura I've ever read.
Oh, what's that?
Adam's
Adam.
piece and Resurrection
Oh,
Fact.
yes. Okay.
No, it's in the one Montgomery and Beath edited.
Sorry, you're right.
That one is.
I'm
But
totally
this
Where
one,
Christ is present.
where Christ is present.
But
yeah.
this one, you actually have a chapter dealing with some of the reasonable objections or
Yeah.
philosophical objections, right?
Yeah. My chapter is entitled something like, because it's been a while, Can a Historian Explain the Empty Tomb by the Resurrection?
Yeah.
Using the normal standards of historical research, and this is the whole book. What can the man or woman of reason, following the evidence, conclude about the end of Jesus' life? You can obviously, just from evidence, conclude Jesus was crucified on a cross, despite what Muslims say. That the tomb was empty on Easter morning is a matter of fact. So how do you explain that tomb? And so at least the way historians usually approach things unless they smuggle in some sort of metaphysic or some sort of naturalistic type of worldview that precludes miracles from happening, the conclusion you've got to draw is, hey, all the evidence suggests he rose from the dead. We can say that. You have to be open to other explanations, but those other explanations have to be based on evidence, not just on philosophical conjecture.
I'm surprised because so often I've heard in contemporary historians they rule out the miraculous before even beginning the quest.
Throughout the book, my chapter focuses on Bart Ehrman, but there's other authors who address Bart Ehrman who does just that. He uses sort of very similar, though he changes some of the language, the reasoning of David Hume back in the 18th century, that it's more based on all of our experience. We don't see people rising from the dead.
Sure.
So it's more reasonable, he assumed, as does Bart Ehrman, that the authors of the Gospels or whoever changed the Gospels or whatever his theory is lied rather than the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. So they're smuggling in this metaphysic that says that miracles don't happen. If the world is open to you and you're just going to allow the evidence to tell you what is the case, the conclusion you will draw with a high degree of probability is that the best explanation is he rose from the dead. So that's sort of reason working in the realm of apologetics. Throughout the book, the introduction to the conclusion, the point is made over and over again that belief that Jesus rose from the dead is not necessarily saving faith.
Yep.
It's simply a historical assertion, or it's part of historical faith. But it is not saving. So reason in the realm of apologetics can certainly remove obstacles to hearing the gospel clearly. It can even more demonstrate certain things to be true and give a good reason why one might want to consider the actual claims of Jesus on your life and so on and so forth. But reason does not save, doesn't even come close to saving, but it can demonstrate the factual aspects of the Christian faith to be true.
And that's in our dogmatics, believe it or not.
Yep.
Those in our own circles who are kind of anti-apologetics have not really followed their own dogmatics. If saving faith is composed in a certain way, foundationally what we call notitia, knowledge of what the facts are, and built on that, what we call a sensus, or acknowledging what you just said, it looks like he actually did rise the third day from the dead. That's the end of what the apologist can do. Because the third level, fiducia, or trust in Christ and his work to save, we can't do. Can't even touch.
So that's great. So that helps actually transition to the next part of the show. But before we do that is shop.1517legacy.com, where you can get that book. And then the essay that Dr. Keith was talking about, which is again on Sola Scriptura and sort of the place that reason has or doesn't have there through history, is available in Where Christ is Present. And so if you buy both of those books in our shop, you'll get free shipping. So if you don't have either of those, I think that's a fantastic addition to your library. I think if you're even relatively interested in apologetics, you should go back to our series on apologetics and listen to it. But I also think the Resurrection Fact should be sitting on your bookshelf because it's easy, it's accessible, and it handles issues topically so that you can go in as you want to read or at your leisure on particular things that might be on your mind or that people you know may be objecting to. So that's a fantastic resource, shop.1517legacy.com. All right, so into our, I mean, it kind of broke it up there, but we are trying to now talk about kind of the use of reason in apologetics, right?
Well, yeah, we're actually talking a little bit about what we were just talking about, advertising the books, is that, what are, and to take it more into the conversation where we left it off before the break, what are the sort of what Caleb said, the proper term, the noetic effects of sin, but let me sort of break that down. How much does sin affect and influence our ability to use our reason? You could say generally, but for our purposes, to know the things of God. And where this comes up in apologetic conversations often is that that group of apologists that we call the presuppositionalists, right? They would essentially say that an innate corruption of our reason after the fall will keep an individual who does not already believe in Christ, who does not already have faith, from seeing any evidence for the resurrection outside of the revelation of Scripture. So you just got to give them this, you just got to talk to them as though the Scriptures are true without ever showing them, like Adam was saying, that sort of the reasonable conclusions that can be made for, say, the
I'll tell you what
evidence for the resurrection and whatnot.
I'll tell you what they're really good at, better than anybody else. They are really good at critiquing the contradictions in non-Christian systems.
Right.
Yeah.
They get an A. Do
A+.
it diligently. Yeah, they do it diligently. But what they will not do is to ever claim that the gospel is true and to defend that. That would be to treat the non-Christian as if he had something going within him that he doesn't.
Yeah, an ability to acknowledge it.
So they will not defend the gospel as true in the open realm of ideas.
Is it fair to say then that they, in a sense, reduce the Christian claim to just a philosophical system that is the only one that is fully coherent
within
itself, and so
assume the whole thing is true to begin with, which is, of course, to the non-Christian, amazing request. Assume the whole thing is true to begin with. Then compare it to whatever system you've got.
Yeah.
And the question is, which one is more coherent? Which one gives you a more coherent interpretation of what you experience.
And I just want to pause because we get asked all the time, why can't presuppositional apologetics and evidential apologetics be used at the same time? And that's because the philosophical strategies that they use aren't themselves presuppositional apologetics. It's that claim, exactly what you're talking about there, where you have to opt into the whole system before you can know, that makes it presuppositional. So if evidentialists are using philosophy to work against some of these borders that people have thrown up in these other systems, that's not necessarily us doing presuppositional apologetics.
No.
It's the actual ask to say you have to buy into this system as coherent before you understand anything within it that makes it presuppositional. And that's why those two cannot work in the same realm, because one asks you to look at evidence and one asks you to adopt a system before you go any further.
Yep.
Will the presuppositionalists in their critique of other worldviews, if you will, would they also critique the lack of facts or evidence behind those worldviews, or is it purely an abstract kind of philosophical
Purely abstract.
assessment? Okay.
The ones I've known. The best ones. The Van Til's best. And the primary was
Bahnsen.
the late Greg
Bahnsen's-
Bahnsen. I mean, he was the quintessential graduate under Van Til. And you ask about Van Til's fabulous successes, and I'd say it was the man more than the thought. I mean, he was quite a man. Really, the kind you'd say, wow, and should. But that doesn't mean that the system is that great. It isn't.
I can, thinking in like the way Muslims do apologetics, they approach things presuppositionally as well.
Of course.
And Islam can be made to be very coherent,
Uh-huh.
internally consistent, so if that's the marker of truth, I mean, Marxism, for heaven's sakes,
Sure.
is
Yes.
internally coherent.
Yeah,
It's a train
yes.
wreck in
Yeah.
the real world. But
Internal
Yes.
consistency is not the marker of truth. I mean, you can any logical proposition can be internally consistent, and the premises upon which that's built be wrong. And
I
thus the
remember when I
conclusion be
was
wrong.
at USC doing doctoral work in philosophy, and somebody came in and interrupted the prof. I think it was Dallas Willard. You don't do that. I mean, only if there's an accident that killed your wife and children. You just don't. The guy came in and whispered to Dr. Willard something and then left. And Dr. Willard dismissed our class. He said, "The flat earthers are outside with their booth. Go see if you can make a dent in it." And these were people that were defending the earth is like a plate.
They've
not-
made a
not like an
resurgence
orange.
in modern times, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
And it's a argument from coherency.
Yep.
Interesting.
So we would, I mean, just to go positive with this, we would not say that the effects of the fall on our reason are such that we can't recognize, how should we say, reasonable conclusions or from data that's presented to us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that we still acknowledge that our reason has the ability to at least analyze, decipher, categorize
Sure.
information.
Something Adam quoted Luther
Yeah, in the
earlier
beginning.
on the Ten Commandments.
such that we can say, well, this set of this data set over here makes more sense than this data set over here.
Sure,
so I'm
and
gonna go with this
we
one.
usually will use, I apologize, a correspondence epistemology,
Right.
not a coherence one.
Right. In other words, that what we say when we say this is true, we are saying that because it corresponds to the outside reality, external facts that are attainable to our senses,
Yep.
or by our senses, and not just because we've come up with some deductive principle that's coherent, internally
Correct.
coherent.
Correct.
And that makes doing then apologetics possible, right?
Yeah.
So you can
Yeah.
do it from the perspective, like Adam said, even during the break, of, what does the historical evidence say?
Yeah, the early church primarily argued from miracle, Christ's own, and culminating in his resurrection. And to Jews, they used fulfilled prophecy, and in particular, messianic prophecy in the Old Testament.
When Paul stood before Agrippa, Acts 26, there's a great line where he said, or he's accused of being mad, crazy. Your great learning has made you mad, Paul. Would you, in so short a time, think you could convince King Agrippa that this is true. And Paul says, I wish not only that I could convince him, but everybody here, because as the king himself knows, this stuff I just been preaching to you did not happen in a corner.
That's right.
It's a matter of the historical record, so
Public.
to speak.
In 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 6-ish, he lays out that public record.
Yep.
Exactly what they saw, who saw it. Some of them are still alive. Go talk to them.
And argues if this is not the case,
1 Corinthians 15, 17.
It's a scam.
it's
We're
a-
most pitiable of all people. Yeah.
we are most to be pitied. Yeah.
Yeah. So then definitely reason, as in our ability to use our God-given senses and reason to discern what's true and what's false, based on the external observable evidence is, still intact to some degree.
Yep.
It's just that we have to be careful, right? We
Yeah.
have to be careful not to put it on a pedestal, not to make it an idol, not to allow systems or ideologies, as Adam said, to sort of influence or to interpret
Color
the
everything.
color or interpret the text for us. We have to be careful. I mean, part of the way we use our reason is to be careful about its use.
Yeah. And I would encourage people to buy Dr. Montgomery's Tractatus. Don't be put off by the Latin title. It's following Wittgenstein. Don't worry about that. It is eminently readable.
Yeah, it's really easy.
It's very readable. His Tractatus.
And because it's we actually compared it in the last one on the Heidelberg Disputation. We brought it up there where they're kind of similar in that they're sentences, and because of that, it makes it very readable. It's not even lengthy academic paragraphs or anything like that. It's literally sentence by sentence points, and so you definitely get this in there. I think there is a whole section on reason. So
Yep.
All right.
I think this is a good place to wrap up. Thank you for listening to the show. If you want to catch, we listed off quite a few books throughout the show, and especially at the break, we covered 2, and those are all in the show notes that are at thinkingfellows.com or on your favorite podcasting app. They're in there as well. We also have a newsletter that is going to be going out every week now, and that newsletter will have the entirety of the show notes plus a short little write-up. So if you'd like to get that in your inbox, you can sign up on our Facebook page or on our website, thinkingfellows.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the show, and we'll catch you next time.